Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing Jonestown, Guyana by Sherwood Forest. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo. So I'm not going to lie, I was prepared to come and do this video and call shenanigans on Winesburg, Ohio, because it's not. Anyway, when you start reading it, it doesn't seem like a novel in the strict sense. It's actually a short story cycle. And there's a different art to short stories because it's a different medium, obviously. You have to have a certain length, and then, you have typically a sting or a mystery or a revelation at the end, and, you reveal as much about the character as you can in such a short time, and it's all about, how much you can convey in such a short time. And so I don't even know that the chapters in this book are numbered, but they are like a series of short stories. And for the first couple of ones, they kind of stick to this motif that each one is about a different person in the town of Winesburg, Ohio. And at first it kind of seems like the only thing that brings them together is that they all live in the same town. In a more modern short story cycle, you would expect that over time, something that was revealed in the beginning as seemingly incidental would be revealed to be a big deal to somebody else later on, and all the different lives would intertwine and that sort of thing. This is a little older-fashioned in that sense. There's none of that, like, oh, something ironic that we knew about the whole time actually meant something big to somebody else. There's very little of that. There's very little crossover. There's only a couple of stories that feature the same characters that later on go on to be main characters. However, the reason why I decided I was okay with it being classified as a novel is because there is kind of a protagonist. There is kind of a main character, which is George Willard. He's often described as a boy or a kid, but I get the impression he's actually in his late teens or early 20s. So I think that the townspeople of Winesburg call him boy more in the diminutive sense than that he's actually a boy. I think that he's a young man, and he is the only reporter for the local Winesburg newspaper. Winesburg is kind of somewhere in between a real, podunk collection of shacks and a church and, a small city. I guess it's kind of an oddity. It's kind of a small town. It's sometimes portrayed as a central area in the county or the local area. There's a county fair there, and sometimes folks talk about, like the farmers talk about going to Winesburg. So it's not completely podunk, but it's certainly not a proper city. So they do have this one newspaper that George Willard is the only reporter for, and he is mentioned. I didn't check every chapter to make sure this was true, but I'm pretty sure he's mentioned in every chapter. But interestingly, except for maybe the last to some extent, almost none of the short stories, none of the chapters, if you want to consider it a novel, are from George's perspective. Instead, it's kind of a look at the town through the eyes of each individual townsperson. And what I found interesting about the methodology in this book is that, I've read some more modern short story cycles, and what you usually get out of it is there's some kind of, ironic twist, and, the connections that you don't know about are revealed later on and that sort of thing. So, like, something that seemed like a real small, insignificant part of somebody else's story would come back and later ironically turn out to be like a big deal to somebody else. And there was not a lot of this in Winesburg, Ohio. There was not a lot of that crossover. There was really hardly a sense of irony at all. It was kind of straightforward, like, here's a character, this is what he's like, whether he's funny or tragic or he or she is funny or tragic or weird or normal or desperately lonely or happy or whatever. They're all kind of played straight, as opposed to maybe we just expect so much irony in our more modern literature. But nevertheless, George Willard is the through line who's featured in almost every story, and at the end of the book he leaves Winesburg, Ohio, hoping to do bigger and better things. But it's not like a traditional, Bildungsroman. It's not like a coming-of-age story or anything. He just kind of witnesses a bunch of shit, and he doesn't, necessarily evolve as a character. The town is almost kind of presented as static. It's interesting. It's different than our modern stuff. It's not bad. Now, the thing about a collection of short stories, and again, this is what's really weird about this. Do you judge it as a collection of short stories, or do you judge it as a novel? Because as a novel, it hardly even rates. There's no, character arc. There's nothing. It's kind of like developing a fictional locale. Now, but if you judge it as a series of short stories, as we all know, whenever you read a group of short stories, there's always weaker entries and stronger entries. I'll just comment I think probably the strongest entry was the first one, which was very strange, and I thought a little bit, I have to assume a little unusual that they would address this issue in that time period. I think this is, turn of the 20th century, maybe 1910s, 1920s. But in the first story, the character thinks of himself as having big hands, and it's kind of implied that he doesn't really necessarily have big giant hands, but that he's a very handsy guy, and he's the kind of guy that will always clap you on the shoulder and will always tussle your hair and that sort of thing. So he was a school teacher in Pennsylvania, and he was very happy, but he was really handsy with all of the kids that he taught. So it's portrayed as entirely innocent, except that the townspeople get it in their head that he's been molesting the kids. So they all run together and beat the shit out of him and get together a lynch mob. And they're about to lynch him, but he's just so pathetic and he doesn't understand what's going on, and he's just like terrified that they kind of relent and give him enough time to run out of town, or maybe they're all just so put off their game that they let him run away. And they're about to hang him because they thought he was a pedophile. And so he runs off to Winesburg to start a new life, and psychologically he's tormented by his hands because he doesn't understand that they thought he was a pedophile. They kept saying, "Keep your hands off my kid," and he thinks there's something physically wrong with his hands. So, it's a couple of different character studies of different psychological people, and as with many short story cycles, there are weak entries and there are strong entries. So, it was kind of interesting. Nothing great, nothing terrible. Quick read, read it in 2 days. Thanks for tuning in. Next time we are going to be talking about The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Thanks for tuning in.